Want to welcome everybody today. We have 100 people here joining us and wanted to welcome you to the Hawaii Soto Mission virtual tour and discussion. And we're very excited to have Professor George Tanabe and Professor Willa Tanabe with us today. But before we get started, I wanted to go over some important information about today's presentation. This will give us a few minutes more to allow some latecomers into the meeting. Okay, but as you enter, you may notice that your microphone is muted. So if you don't mind keeping your microphones muted throughout the presentation, that way we can make sure we don't have any interruptions. During the registration process, you were given the opportunity to ask questions of our presenters, and these questions were forwarded to our presenters, and they were all wonderful questions, and they promised to give their best try to answer your questions, but forgive us if we don't have the time to answer all your questions. As many of you may be aware and already know, with Zoom, you can chat. So if you have any questions, comments, feel free to communicate with us or with one another via the chat function. Today's virtual tour is being recorded as well. So Reverend Hoshino will be posting this video after it's finished on YouTube. So you can rewatch this, or maybe someone you know who's interested in watching but couldn't be here today will be able to watch this video. Okay, but I'm to get started at this time. And before we get started, I wanted to introduce our two presenters. George Tanabe was born and raised in Wailua, Hawaii. He graduated from University High School, Willamette University, Union Theological Seminary, and Columbia University. That was for his master and PhD. From 1977 through 2006, he taught in the Department of Religion at the University of Hawaii and is currently Professor Emeritus. He is president of BDK Hawaii and chairman of BDK America, which publishes Buddhist books, including translations from the Chinese Buddhist Kannon. He is a specialist on the religions of Japan, especially Buddhism, and has co-authored, or edited books that include Myoe, the Dream Keeper, Practically Religious, Religions of Japan in Practice, and Sources of Japanese Tradition. In 2007, he received the Foreign Minister's Award from the Japanese government, and in 2012, he was honored with the Imperial Order of the Rising Sun. He still lives in Wailua today. And Professor Tanabe was also my dean when I was a religion student at UH. So he was my advisor and professor. Willa Tanabe was born in Sewickley, Pennsylvania, and was raised in Astoria, Oregon. She attended Willamette University and graduated from the University of Oregon and Columbia University. That's for her master's and PhD. From 1977 through 2006, she taught in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of Hawaii and also served as Dean of the School of Hawaiian, Asian, and Pacific Studies. She is currently Professor Emerita of Art History. Willa is a specialist in the history of the art of Japan and China with a specialty in Buddhist art. Her books include The Lotus Sutra in Japanese Culture, The Art of the Lotus Sutra, Painting with Threads, Japanese Embroidery and First Impressions, Japanese Prints of Foreigners. Willa and George recently published Japanese Buddhist Temples of Hawaii, an illustrated guide. And so many of you might have this book. It's a wonderful book with a lot of information. But there's a lot of information that I was able to share. But now the best part is to be able to introduce our presenters, George and Willa Tanabe. And today they're going to be giving us a tour of the Hawaii Soto Mission temples. During this pandemic, when people say no can do nothing, cannot do anything, how wonderful it is to be able to tour the Hawaii Soto Mission temples, even if it's virtually, with our very skilled and knowledgeable tour guides. So with that, I'd like to welcome Professor George Tanabe and Professor Willa Tanabe. All right, hand it off to you.
All right, can you hear me? Okay, good. Well, thank you, Reverend Komagata. It's a pleasure for us to do this tour. We're learning all kinds of new habits during this pandemic, wearing masks and social distancing, but also learning to use Zoom, which I think everybody is using for personal as well as for professional purposes. Um, we would like to take you on a tour of every Soto Zen temple in the state of Hawaii based on the book that we published. And we hope you able to enjoy it. We're going to be kind of speeding through. We have a lot of slides, so we're going to be speeding through the tour. You want to say something?
No.
No? Okay. All right.
Share.
So Shuji, I'm going to share screen now. Okay. So yeah, I hope you can all hear me. So this is our virtual tour, and we're going to start with going through some of the basic architectural styles that we see in the temples here in Hawaii.
There are several: traditional Japanese style, a simplified traditional Japanese style, an Indian Western, and a house of worship, which is divided into residential and church styles. Can you all see the slides? Can you raise your hand if you see them? Okay, great.
Okay, good.
The first temple that we'll look at is Aiea Mantokuji, the Temple of Complete Virtue. I love that name, the Temple of Complete Virtue. It was built in 1921, and it's a very traditional style. And you can see that in the sharply pitched gable roofs with the upturned edges and the decoration right at the peaks. There are two, it looks like two roofs here, but one is the roof over the entryway. And the entryway is very important to a Japanese temple. You always walk up the stairs, or almost always. It's almost always raised off the ground, the main hall. But you first go through an entryway. And what's unique here is what looks like a curtain around the entryway, but which is really white wooden pieces of wood that have the crest that signify that this is a Soto denomination temple. It's very beautiful, and you're only seeing the central part, but like all important temples, there were social halls, a parsonage, belfry, all sorts of subsidiary buildings here, including a crematory.
This is Kona Daifukuji Soto Zen Temple. This too is also done in the traditional style with the high roof, the curved eaves out here, the entryway that goes under a transom. To the right is the minister's residence. To the left is a Kannon hall, which also is a kind of a social gathering place as well. And in the back is the columbarium where people's remains are placed. So we call this traditional style, but you'll notice that there is a wheelchair ramp that goes up. So this is ADA compliant. So it's a modernized traditional style temple.
The third traditional style Soto temple is Zenshuji in Hanapepe. Now, this is a very interesting temple because the original Zenshuji was in Wahiwa, Kauai, and it was built quite early, around 1918. But as the plantation population moved down to other centers of areas in Kauai, in 1978, the congregation decided to uh, move their temple and build a new temple. And they, although it was new in 1978, they decided to do it in a traditional style. And so you have the sharply peaked roofs and the decoration along the roof. You have the transverse beam and the entryway that is carved. All of this is very traditional, and the four posts are traditional. But they've also added shoji doors and sort of bell-shaped windows. So there is a very conscious effort to hearken to an older style.
And in Hilo, the Soto temple there is, we call it a simplified traditional style. Simplified because the tall, high peak sweeping roof is gone. Now there's a flat gable roof on both sides. But it still is traditional in that there's a very large entryway with a curved, traditionally styled top, stairway that goes up, leading into the temple.
The headquarters, the Betsuin of Soto denomination in Hawaii, is the Temple Shoboji in Honolulu. It's in the Indian Western style, and it was designed in 1952 by architect Robert Katsuyoshi. Like several of the other main headquarters of denominations in Hawaii, the congregation chose to use an Indian Western style. The Indian Western style is seen in such things as, for example, there is a flat roofed, four pillared entryway. That's very unusual, not at all Japanese. And the pillars are very Western, and the flat roof is, of course, a more Western element. But at the corner of the four roofs are these sort of miniature towers. And in the main building, there is a huge tower that has recessed rectangular forms and then is topped with a wheel, 9 spires, and a kind of wish granting jewel shape at the very top. And then flanking this building are 2 octagonal sub halls. And you can see the Indian influence not only in the top, the tower that represents a pagoda, but also in the curved doorway. It's a Mughal curve, an Indian Mughal curve from the Mughal dynasty style. The reason that this Indian Western style was chosen by so many headquarters was the fact that the people wanted to emphasize that Buddhism was not just a Japanese religion. It had its origins in India, and it went across to Asia. It was a multinational religion. And so it emphasizes that this is a world religion, not just a Japanese religion. On the inside, however, the interior is purely like a Japanese temple.
So this is unique to Hawaii. You can see in the Honganji headquarters temple on Pali Highway, that big white building that you pass on the way up on the Pali Highway. You can see it in the pink headquarters of the Jodo mission. Again, you pass it on the freeway on that big pink building that looks like the Taj Mahal, very Indian. So the early leaders of Buddhist temples in Hawaii really wanted to make a statement architecturally, so that when people looked at the temples, they didn't see a traditional Japanese temple, even though the religion is traditional Japanese, but they wanted to make a statement to say that Buddhism is an international, a universal religion. And it's really fascinating that we have classical Western columns, Islamic arches, Indian stupa forms, and then on the inside, of course, as we'll see, it's very traditionally Japanese.
The next 4 temples, the last 4 temples, are done in a modern style. These were made mostly post World War II. On Molokai, Guzeiji Soto Mission is the house style, the residence, like a residence style. If you took away the little bit of decoration along the edge of the roof, you wouldn't know that there was anything Japanese about it. In fact, The more modern styles often just don't put in Japanese touches or put in very few. Again, the interior is strictly Japanese temple-like, but the exterior, and this one was made in 1983, so it really could be just anybody's house almost.
This is Aiea Taiheiji. This is Reverend Komagata's temple. Here, again, we classify this as just a house of worship or church style. You could imagine this to be a church of from any religious tradition, has a flat roof, stairway going up. Now, there used to be, and I think you're going to see this later in the short video that Reverend Komagata will show, there used to be a structure on the top that indicated that this really was a Buddhist temple, but that structure has been taken down now, and so right now it looks like a fairly ordinary kind of building that could be a part of any religious tradition.
In Wahiwa, we have the Ryusenji, the Temple of the Lurking Dragon. And it is also a sort of house style. It's very big, so it's bigger than a house. But if you imagine it a little smaller, you can see that basically it's a style that can be seen in houses in Hawaii. The only temple-like additions to the architecture are the designs at the top of the roof or the Daruma wheel that indicates that this is a Buddhist temple. But other than that, it's a fairly plain style. This temple, by the way, was originally in Kauailoa, in the hills above Haleiwa.
Well, not the temple, the congregation.
The congregation, sorry.
Yeah.
And there was a temple, and it was called Ryusenji. But it was moved again, the population moved away from plantations, and the congregation decided to build a new Ryusenji in Wahiwa. If you go inside, there is still the carving of the dragon that was on the original Ryusenji temple that you can see.
This is Waipahu Soto Mission, and I think you'll all agree with us that it's a lovely, lovely building, really great architecture. In some ways, extremely simple, reminiscent of a mountain, lava rock wall on the outside that's really integrated into the style of the building. You can see the slope of the wall merges right up into the building. This is a great example.
Into the slope of the roof.
Into the slope of the roof, and really is a great example of kind of modern Hawaii architecture. So what did Reverend Kokuzo say about this?
When we interviewed him, he said this was very intentional, a building that was to reflect Hawaii and Hawaiian roots. And so you have a lava rock wall, and you have a building with these four sides of the roof that are very large that were meant to recall early Hawaiian thatched roof buildings. And only the spire again on top, a wheel, 9 rings, and a wish-granting jewel shape. The top makes it clear that this is a Buddhist temple.
So those are all 9 of the Soto Zen temples in Hawaii across the islands. And so now we go inside the temple. Here we are looking at the main altar of Aiea Soto Mission. And the layout of every Soto temple is basically the same. Of course, everyone is individually different, but the basic layout is the same, with the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha in the center. And then to the right side is the figure, a sculpture of Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen, in Japan. And to the left is one of the other patriarchs of Soto Zen in Japan, Keizan. We will be speaking about Shakyamuni, Dogen, and Keizan a little bit later.
Every temple is divided into 2 areas. The outer area, the Geijin, which is for the congregation. And that's very plain usually, not much decoration, because that represents our ordinary world. But then there is the world of the Buddha, the realm of the Buddha, which is the altar area, the inner area, the Naijin. And that's what you're looking at here, the Naijin. And that's usually again raised above the congregational area. The statue of the main image, the historical Buddha, is up on a platform, and usually there are curtains that partially sort of as if it's unveiling the Buddha. There's additional furniture. There's altar tables in the front to hold flowers and incense burners, candles. There are lanterns and all sorts of decorations that hang from the ceiling, all in gilded metal, because the Buddha's world has been described as golden, just as the body of the Buddha has been described as having a golden glow. And so it's important to use this golden materials to reflect the highest quality of materials used in the Buddha's realm, in the realm of enlightenment. This is the main image, Shakyamuni, or the historical Buddha as a Buddha. You can tell that because he has a halo. Divine creatures have halos. And he sits on a lotus flower. And his hands are in a specific gesture or mudra that means contemplation or meditation. And like all Buddhas, since he has achieved enlightenment, his face shows no human-like emotions. There's no anger, there's no laughter. It's a very peaceful, tranquil face of someone who is not attached to the human desires and emotions and so forth. He's in priestly robes, very plain, and is, I think, a real image of tranquility that we would all like to attain ourselves.
Especially in these difficult times. Yeah. I wonder if he got vaccinated already. I hope so. The story of the Buddha is, I think, fairly well known. We'll go through it fairly quickly. Most of you, I think, are familiar with the story of the Buddha. But, he's referred to with several names. His first name as a young man was Siddhartha. Gautama is his family name. And after he became enlightened or awakened, he was given the title, it's not a name, personal name, but a title of Buddha, which means the enlightened one or the awakened one. He's also referred to as Shakyamuni, uh, meaning the sage of the Shakya clan. So his father was a king of the Shakya clan, a small principality in ancient India. And again, we're talking about a long time ago. We're talking about 500 years before Christ. So 500 BC is when the story of the human Buddha takes place. Now, by the time the story of the Buddha is written up, which is about 500 years after his actual life in India, the story becomes very mythic. The story becomes, embellished. And so it is said that the Buddha was born from his, not from his mother's womb. He popped out from her side, landed on 2 feet, and raised his arm up, saying, "This is my last rebirth." So this figure of the baby Buddha is what is used in the ceremony to celebrate the birth of the Buddha. Hanamatsuri, a Japanese term meaning the flower festival, and the bowl around the Buddha is filled with sweet tea, and people will come up with these little tiny ladles and pour sweet tea over the Buddha to commemorate his birth.
That's because at his birth it is said that flowers fell from the sky and sweet water, a mist, sort of fell from the sky. So we're replicating it by dousing him with sweet tea. And usually the roof of this kind of pavilion at the festival is covered with flowers.
So the baby Buddha grows up. He's a young prince, and he is growing up in a palace. It has everything for him, all the food, all the clothing, all the friends, everything. He is living a life of luxury. And he grows up to be a young man. And as a young man, he then does something that was really revolutionary for him. He took a trip outside of the palace, and there he saw people working in the fields, laborers. He noticed that they did not look happy. And then he saw a sick person, again, someone suffering. And then
Old person.
an old person, and they did not look very happy, although I think old age not so bad. And then he saw a dead person, and he was shocked. What was that? He kept asking his attendants, and the attendants said, "Well, people working, people get sick, people get old, and people die." And he was really impressed by the difference of ordinary people's lives with his own life of luxury. But the more important experience he really had was that even within his life of luxury in the palace, very very affluent life, he realized that he was not happy. And again, we see in this story something very universal, which is why Buddhism became a universal religion and spread to so many different countries and has lasted for over 2,500 years. Because the basic issue it addresses is an issue that we can all identify with. Not only the fact that life is tough, sickness, don't we know that right now, especially sickness, old age, hard work, death, but also that the life of luxury is not totally satisfying. And I think a lot of people can identify with that. And so the young Siddhartha was very upset about this discovery, and so he set out on a path to find the answer to the question, very simple question, very universal question: how can I be happy?
And especially, how can I be happy with so much suffering? And so he first went to all sorts of teachers, trying to learn what they had to teach and their way of life, and it all failed. He failed. He couldn't find the key to happiness or the meaning of life or anything, although he tried so many things. He eventually wound up realizing that the answer to the questions were inside him, not outside of him. And so he went to a place and sat under a concentrated and what happened? Oh,
Whoops.
excuse us. Slideshow. No, before.
Yeah.
So while he was concentrating and thinking about it, it was through that effort of looking deep down inside himself that he found enlightenment. Now, one of the things that happened when he was concentrating was that he was attacked by or experienced all sorts of delusions that were pulling him away from enlightenment. And this is reflected in the story of Mada, who's often sort of called the Buddhist devil. And this is Mada. He puts his finger up and he's trying to break the Buddha's concentration. And he offers his beautiful daughters and he sends demons after him. And all of these demons and creatures represent different desires. And they all attack the Buddha, trying to break his concentration, but it doesn't break, and he gains enlightenment. And we can see how this is reflected in a painting at Aiea, Taiheiji, by the halo behind him, which means he's divine, and by the hand that reaches down to the ground, because it said that he calls on the whole earth to witness that he has become enlightened. And this story of his temptation, but his success at achieving enlightenment, is told many times in many ways, including at the Betsuin.
At the main headquarters, Betsuin Temple in Honolulu, if you look up at the transom, which is the woodwork over the front edge of the altar area, you will see this story of Shakyamuni toad carved into the transom. Every item in a temple has a meaning. Every item has a story, and so it's as if every temple is preaching some kind of lesson, except it is done through objects and through architecture, and we just need to pay attention to what is being said to us. So here again, we have the picture of the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree, his hand touching the earth. We see Mara challenging him, trying to break his meditation. We see one of his beautiful daughters. In another panel, we see his other two beautiful daughters trying to seduce him. We see a warrior here trying to threaten him. And all of these are sort of external representations of what really is going on inside of him, inside of his mind, inside of his heart. And all of the temptations and the fears are something that he is feeling within him, but artistically, they're simply represented as external figures threatening his meditation.
On the other transom, or Ramma, at the headquarter temple in Honolulu, we see what happens after Siddhartha becomes the Buddha and now then is referred to as Shakyamuni Buddha. We see him giving his first sermon, his first preaching at Deer Park, and that is represented by him sitting under a Bodhi tree still, but with the deer flanking him to indicate that it took place at Deer Park. And he's preaching, and that's reflected by the wheel behind him, the wheel of the Dharma, the wheel of the teachings that he's turning for the first time for people. Of course, eventually, this historical figure, Siddhartha, who became Shakyamuni Buddha, dies because he's a real person, and he dies. And every year there is a ceremony in memory of the Buddha's death. And very often the pictures of the death of the Buddha, as described in scriptures, is hung in temples. This one from Zenshuji at Hanapepe. Beautiful painting that shows Shakyamuni lying on a platform in a grove of sal trees, surrounded by his followers and even by animals below, and his mother above in the clouds. And everyone, including the animals, cry and weep because he has died. We see him lying on his right side, as described in the scriptures, and you see monks, you see bodhisattvas, you see dragon kings with a dragon on top of his head, all kinds of beings, all saddened, at least it looks like it at first, by his physical death. He has entered nirvana, and they're all sad because they no longer have him with them.
Also significant in this picture is, you'll notice that it's a very diverse group. You have women and men, you have monks and lay people, you have Asian figure here, probably Chinese. You have people with very different kind of hairdo. They're probably Central Asians or Indians. And so once again, pointing out that Buddhism was a universal religion.
His mother, who has been reborn in a heaven, not a paradise, this heaven will end, but she has heard that her son is dying, and she wants to go see him one more time, like any mother would. So she's led by a monk, and she has two attendants, and she comes down from the heavens in a cloud, but she's too late. And so she too is sobbing because her son has died, and she has not got to talk with him one more time. Everyone is sad, except if you look below him, there are two figures that are not sad. One is a bodhisattva here, and one is a monk who is not only not sad, he's fallen asleep in this very emotional, dramatic scene. He's sleeping. But those are the two figures that truly understand the Buddha's message, not to be attached. That suffering is when you're attached to something, even the Buddha. And so they are without emotion. They're accepting what has happened, and they know that the truth of what he has taught, that what the Buddha has taught, is going to continue. And so they are sort of going through their grief. They do not have to have as much grief as all the others who are afraid for themselves because the Buddha has died.
Um, as I said, the Buddha lived 500 years before Christ, which means that if we take the story all the way up to today, Buddhism has been around for 2,500 years. It is not surprising, therefore, to see that there will be great changes that came about in a religion, especially a religion that has as one of its central teachings, everything changes according to different causes and conditions. So as Buddhism moves across from India, across Central Asia, into China, down to Korea, to Japan, off into Southeast Asia, and finally, over to Hawaii and the mainland and Europe, it goes everywhere in the world. And obviously, there are going to be changes according to the different circumstances that Buddhism finds itself in. So there are many differences in the Buddhist teachings, but I just want to point out one, or two really significant differences between the early teachings and then the later what is called Mahayana or the Great Vehicle teachings, which is what developed in Japan and what we have here in Hawaii. So with the early teaching, the Buddha's basic teaching was, you need to generate good karma, which means you have to do good and avoid evil. This is the central point of the Buddha's enlightenment. This is what he realized, that you have to be good. And it's really striking to remember that even though we sometimes think of the Buddha or Buddhism as dealing with very profound, mysterious, mystic kind of teachings that you cannot really express so clearly in words, the actual teaching of Shakyamuni, as we have it in the early scriptures, is really straightforward and it's really universal. Be good, don't be bad. That's it. And if you can do that, you will generate good karma and you will therefore go to nirvana. Now, there were all kinds of questions that his disciples raised. Is the world eternal? What's the relationship between the soul and the body? Is there a soul at all? And if you are saved, do you get reborn? And the Buddha's response to that was basically, those are silly questions. We can put it more strongly and say those are stupid questions. And they're silly and stupid because they have no real answers that anybody can figure out. In effect, what the Buddha was saying when asked, is the world eternal? He was saying, how should I know? I'm completely worried about how to solve the problem of suffering in life. I have no idea what happens after life. The second thing that's really important to point out about the early Buddhist teachings that there are no gods or no divine beings. Shakyamuni was human, that's it. And he had a very human teaching to teach. There were no gods to worship or divine beings who can come and save you. Now, again, Buddhism goes across many different cultures, countries, and time. And in later Mahayana Buddhism, the Buddha himself, Shakyamuni himself, becomes divinized. And so now we see theism, or we see the development of gods. We see the development of bodhisattvas like Kannon, of Jizo, of Buddhas like Amida. And so Mahayana Buddhism is pantheistic. It has many different gods and divine beings. And the reason is actually fairly straightforward. Why should there be gods and divine beings in a religion that originally said there are no gods or divine beings? And the answer is that the basic teaching of good karma was impossible to achieve. How can anybody be morally perfect, to have perfectly good karma? Impossible. We are all frail, we are all morally imperfect, and we are not able to achieve what the Buddha said we should achieve. And so people turned to greater powers, turned to gods who have the power to confer practical benefits, wealth, success, healing, all the things that we want that we cannot get entirely by ourselves, or at least we feel like we need help in getting the things we want. And also, later Mahayana will say that after you die, you are reborn in some better place, some kind of a Buddhist heaven, which is called the Pure Land. So you can see the difference that took place from the early teachings to the later teachings.
We're back at the altar area, and we just want to point out that the two priests that are shown to the left and right, this is Dogen on the right as you face the altar, you always have the images of these figures, because Dogen was the founder of Soto Zen in Japan. He concentrated and emphasized meditation, and he founded Taiheiji, one of the two headquarter temples of Soto denomination. You can always recognize Dogen because he's dressed as fairly simple, plain robes. As a monk, he sits in a Chinese-style lacquered chair. His legs are up as if he's going to meditate, and his empty shoes are on a footstool. They're Chinese-style shoes down below. He carries a whisk in his hand.
So his basic teaching was meditation. And in fact, Soto is the name of the denomination. There are several denominations of Zen in Japan. The word Zen means meditation. So when we speak about the Zen school or Zen Buddhism, we're talking about the Buddhism that has central to it meditation. And Dogen's teaching was that every person has the Buddha nature within. That is to say, the potential to become a Buddha, the potential to become enlightened, the potential to be morally perfect, as the Shakyamuni Buddha taught. But that in order to activate this potentiality within each person, you had to meditate. Here we see a meditation session. This is a Bishop Komagata, Reverend Shuji's father, leading a meditation session at the Molokai Temple. Um, for for centuries, Soto Zen Buddhism in Japan, even though it is the teaching of meditation, for the most part, ordinary lay persons, members of the temple, did not really meditate. They really went to the temple for funeral services, for memorial services. But lately, and all of you are aware of this, and I would say in the last 20, 25 years or so, maybe even longer, meditation has become popular. Meditation has entered into popular mainstream American culture. We talk about mindfulness, we talk about meditation. And so, what we're seeing today is a kind of a revitalization or a renaissance of meditation practice. And so, here is Reverend Komagata leading a group of people in meditation.
On the left side of the altar is the sculpture of Keizan, the fourth patriarch of the Soto school and Soto denomination. He too sits on a lacquered Chinese chair. His feet are up, so his empty shoes are on a footstool. But you can see now how ornate his gown is supposed to be. Very brocade, full of brocade-like material. And this reflects his high status. Dogen, on the other hand, even though he was a founder, maintained a simplicity of dress, but Keizan is much more fancily dressed.
Now, anybody who has practiced meditation, as Dogen taught, will know. I'm sure many of you have had this experience. It's not easy, it's hard to sit in meditation for a long time. Our mind are like wild monkeys or elephants, as it is said in the Buddhist scriptures. Very hard to control. Uh, Keizan popularized Zen Buddhism by developing this really clever idea that lifestyle can be a ritual or lifestyle can be a practice. So that if you're cooking, if you have the right frame of mind, cooking can be an act of meditation. You can be cleaning the yard, raking the leaves in the yard, and that too can be an occasion for entering into the mind of meditation. So Keizan popularized Soto Zen by turning lifestyle, ordinary activities, into a ritual, and you didn't have to limit yourself to going and sitting in zazen or sitting in meditation as the only way to practice your meditation.
Often near the two patriarchs of the Soto sect, you will have the crest of the temples that they founded. Dogen's Aiheiji crest is five bamboo leaves separated by gentian flowers, and Keizan's is a paulownia plant, which has three leaves and then flowers or buds of five, and then seven, and then five buds. And you'll see this as decoration on curtains, on brocades in the temple, and here in the censer, you see the two crests.
Of course, Eiheiji and Sojiji being institutions, and all human institutions get involved with politics and economics and disagreements. And historically, there was a lot of rivalry between the two temples, Eiheiji and Sojiji. Um, uh, they sometimes got into heated the debates about doctrine and practice and administration and so on. But Reverend Komagata's great grandfather, um, Komagata family has a long history in Hawaii of four generations of ministers. Uh, Reverend Komagata's great grandfather said that here in Hawaii there should be no rivalry between Eiheiji and Sojiji, and so he had this flower vase made with this very unique crest in which both the Eiheiji and the Sojiji crests are superimposed one on each other. And he said, here in Hawaii, there is no rivalry between Eiheiji and Sojiji. So here again is another example of some kind of a unique Hawaiian interpretation of Buddhism.
Also, often near the altar area in some temples, you will have two other figures that will be shown. One on the left is Daigen Shuri. He was originally a guardian of Chinese temples, but the Soto sect adopted him, made him a bodhisattva, and he still acts as a protector to temples. To reflect his Chinese origin, he has a very Chinese face, the goatee and mustache. He has a Chinese hat and Chinese robes, and his hand is up at his forehead as if looking into the distance to make sure he sees if any danger is approaching the temple. And paired with him is often an image of Daruma, Bodhidharma in Sanskrit, but Daruma, who is the monk who brought Zen to China. We don't know whether he was Indian or Central Asian, but definitely not East Asian. So his face, he has a larger nose and bigger eyes and beard, and he is more Western. He has a scarf, and here he's dressed in very elaborate robes. But in most portrayals of Daruma, you get an emphasis on his eccentricity and his individualism, and he's shown in very simple robes, and his face is very striking. He has a protuberance on his head that indicates wisdom. It's an ancient sign of wisdom, and that's sometimes covered over with the scarf that we just saw in the other image. He has very wide eyes, and that's not just because he's Western, not from Central Asia or India, but because when Daruma came to China, he sat in a cave for 9 years in meditation, and he didn't want to fall asleep, so he cut his eyelids off. So his eyes are always very big. And then he has large ears. Sometimes he has earrings on. He doesn't hear. And he looks really like someone you might not want to meet in an alleyway at night. He looks very grumpy and sort of powerful, but that emphasizes
Tough guy.
it emphasizes his iconoclasm and his approach to Buddhism, which was to meditate, to discover the enlightenment inside you. And he's now become really a popular sort of even commercial figure. And the Tendai mission in Hawaii, they have a big collection, this is only part of it, of all the kind of Daruma dolls you can find if you go to Japan. And of course, here in Hawaii and in Japan, we're used to the Daruma dolls for success. Now, Daruma dolls are noted because they always come back. They are persistent. And dolls, these kind of dolls, you can tip over and they'll come right back, which is the characteristic we should have as persistence, sort of like Elizabeth Warren. Nevertheless, she persisted. You know, she bounced back. And of course, in Hawaii, yeah, and in Hawaii, we have them where you get a doll that has no eyes painted in, and you paint in an eye when you start a big project, and you paint the other eye if you successfully complete it. So
Politicians will often do this when they start off on a campaign, have a big rally, paint in one eye, and if they get elected, paint in the other eye. I suppose if they don't get elected, they just have a one-eyed
I
Daruma
don't know how
in
many
their
one-eyed
collection.
Daruma
Yeah,
are
how
in
many
Hawaii.
one-eyed Darumas do we have?
Uh,
So we talked about the development of deities, powerful beings who can help us because we cannot always help ourselves. And Kannon, the figure of Kannon, is a very important figure in Soto Zen. So much so that at the Soto Mission Betsuin, the main figure is, of course, Shakyamuni. But see how small he is? And he's dwarfed by this gigantic figure of Kannon, and it also, it represents the importance that Kannon has in Soto Zen. Surrounding Shakyamuni on the sides are 33 different images of Kannon, because it is said that Kannon appears in 33 different manifestations. The idea being that Kannon can appear in different guises, in different identities, because people have many different kinds of problems, and so you need a different kind of problem Kannon to solve the problem. This Kannon has 11 heads. Again, the same idea of sort of having multiple heads, multiple manifestations, because people have multiple problems.
the story behind the 11-headed Kannon, which is this one, is that Kannon once was helping someone, only had one head, was facing someone and helping them, and failed to see people behind the figure, behind Kannon. And so Kannon was so distressed that he missed being able to help people. He split his head into 8 different forms, um, uh, to be able to see in all directions. Kannon, the name Kannon or Avalokiteshvara means he who hears the cries of the world. So this Buddha is intended to hear all the cries of the world and to help everyone. There is always an Amida Buddha in the headdress, and that's seen also at the bronze 1796 image at Aiea's Taiheiji. There is an Amida, and then there are the 11 heads. At Hanapepe Zen Shuji, we have a giant uh, Kannon outside, and this is only a single-headed figure, but you do still see a seated Amida in the headdress. Now, there's always a question about what sex is Kannon. Is Kannon male or female? In China, Guanyin, the name of Kannon in Chinese, Guanyin is often presented as a very recognizable female. I call Kannon he because I was trained in art history, Japanese art history.
I call Kannon she
because he's wrong. No.
because I think she is a very lovely figure, woman.
He is a very lovely figure, and in Japan, most often you have these figures that look very feminine but have mustaches. So when I see the mustache, I think male. But in fact, since Kannon can appear in 33 different ways, including female form, you could argue that Kannon is both male and female. What makes us think that, or my husband think that he's female, is because Kannon is very beautifully dressed. Has a swelling chest. He wears a skirt and scarves that seem and jewelry that seem very feminine, but that's what bodhisattvas wear.
So sometimes Kannon is described as androgynous, but maybe it's better to think along the lines of Kannon can appear in 33 different guises. Kannon has 11 heads, and so why not have Kannon be male and female? So in that sense, this is kind of a very modern idea, or what we identify with modern idea in terms of equality, or being able to switch back and forth between being male and female.
Daifukuji in Kona has wonderful images of Kannon. There is this image on the left that was gifted by Prime Minister Saito to the temple in memory of his brother. His brother came to Hawaii in about 1894 and died suddenly, unexpectedly, at only 29 years of age in 1896. The temple took care of his body. They buried him in the graveyard, and Saito, Makoto Saito, was very grateful for this. Now, that was a long time ago. He remembered it all the way. He died in 1936. He was assassinated, actually, as prime minister. But in 1935, he'd arranged for this statue to be made and to be sent to Daifukuji. So it was dedicated there in 1937. It is larger than life size, and it is really a very gorgeous, beautiful statue.
At the bottom of this the large statue is this smaller wooden statue. We have a close-up of the picture here. And this Kannon was carved in an internment camp during World War II, somewhere on the mainland. We don't know who the person was who carved it, but in the back of this carving is the name Elsa. And so we call this the Elsa Kannon, someone who has been someone who carved the Kannon, and we think dedicated it to Elsa, whoever Elsa might have been, a mother, a grandmother, a wife, a girlfriend, who knows. But at any rate, you can see the way how Kannon was used to express people's very personal kind of feelings, like the Prime Minister Saito dedicating this in memory of his brother, this one being carved in for the sake of, maybe remembrance of, Elsa.
Daifukuji also has a contemporary print. This says painted, but it's a print.
Oh yeah.
Of a Kannon that the artist imagined. So it is a Kannon standing on the lotus, holding a lotus, but on the back of a dolphin in the middle of the sea. And it's called Keala Kekua Kannon. That's where the artist lived.
At the main headquarters temple, again, we pointed out the 33 Kannon that are on the side flanking Shakyamuni. At the front of it is the figure of a sendatsu, who is the guide to pilgrimage. 33 Kannon have very famous pilgrimage routes in Japan, the most famous being the pilgrimage route in Saikoku. And this is a selection of 33 temples, and you would go on a pilgrimage, go from one temple to the next temple to the next temple. And as you know, pilgrimage is a very important practice in Buddhism, and this represents the 33 Kannon who are part of the pilgrimage in Saikoku region. And being a pilgrimage, you need a guide, you need a travel guide. And so people would gather the group, say, we want to go on the pilgrimage to visit the 33 temples, and they would hire a guide. The guide was called the sendatsu.
There are many temples that have these 33 images of the different variations of Kannon, and also the tour guide, this one in Hilo at Taishoji. So you can see that the 33 Kannon, very important in Soto. And at Aiea, Taiheiji, about 2.5 years ago, they dedicated a new hall for Kannon and the 33 images done in beautiful hinoki wood, sweet smelling wood. And here's a detail of some of the images, and you can see how varied they are. They hold different things, their poses are different. So in the 33 pilgrimage, each temple would have one of these images.
This Kannon here, I can really identify with. I think many of us can, because he's sitting at a desk, and hand on the desk, and then his other hand is up against his cheek, as if to indicate that he's having trouble understanding what he's reading or trying to figure out what the solution is. And so it's a very kind of a common predicament or situation that we might find ourselves in.
At Daifukuji, there is a set of 33 Kannon, along with the sendatsu or tour leader. And in a ceremonial ritual each year, you can go on this miniature pilgrimage, stepping on each station, station 1, station 2, which means temple 1, temple 2, to see these Kannon. So you can't maybe go to Japan, that's a little expensive. And if you wanted to go to all 33 temples, it would take quite some time. But at Daifukuji and in other temples, you can take a whole miniature tour and be through the 33 temples in about 10 minutes. And so you get the merit of taking a pilgrimage, but you also save time.
At Hilo Taishoji, there is another Kannon. Again, many different kinds of Kannon. This is called the Baika or plum blossom Kannon, and it's associated with Baika choral group, Goeka
choral music.
That's very beautiful and very important to Soto Zen ritual practice.
What I find interesting in all of these temples is that you have images that were made even in the 18th century, but you also have images that were made just in our lifetime. And this is the Peace Kannon, dedicated to the victims of war. It's an embroidery at Taiheiji. And what's interesting about this embroidery is that the women of the temple did it, and they incorporated 5 strands. Each woman put in 5 strands of her hair along with the threads to make this image, so that what you're seeing is an actual physical part of the makers being mixed in or incorporated, blended with the image.
Besides Kannon, another figure who is very important is Jizo. Jizo, again, like Kannon, has many different functions. One of the functions is to protect children. So here at Kona, we see Jizo with the children around Jizo's feet. Jizo can also save those who, because of their bad karma, have fallen into hell. Here is a demon of hell, and Jizo can protect people or even release people, have people escape from hell through his divine intervention. Jizo is often depicted, or is always depicted, as a monk. Even though he's a bodhisattva, he's depicted as a monk, usually wearing very beautiful robes.
But with a halo, so that you know he's not an ordinary monk, and he usually holds a staff and a wish-granting jewel.
At Hilo Taishoji, and again, just like Kannon, there are many different kinds of Jizo. Here is an Enmei Jizo, Enmei meaning to prolong your life. So people who want to live a long life can come and pray to this Jizo and hope that they will live very long lives.
One of my, in most temples you might find stone Jizos, and one of my favorite are the 3 Jizo at Wahiwa's Ryusenji, the Mumu Jizos. You know, from 14th century, Jizos were dressed in robes in Japan, in actual clothes. And so this is a very long tradition that we have in Japanese Buddhism, and here we see it adapted to Hawaii, where they're wearing muumuus. The standing Jizo on the right had his eye damaged by anti-Japanese thugs in World War II, and he was tossed away, and he was recovered from Wahiwa Reservoir and saved. The central seated Jizo was made in Tokyo in 1922 for the original Ryusenji that was up in Kawailoa, up above Haleiwa. And the left Jizo on the side was 1912, and it was originally located on the beach at Mokuleia and made to protect swimmers and especially fishermen.
Some of you will know that there is a Jizo at the blowhole on Oahu, and early on There used to be Japanese who loved to do shore fishing, shore casting, would often set up Jizos as protective deities because some of the fishing spots were also very dangerous spots on the ocean.
Finally, at Paia Montokuji, there are jizo made of casts of white plaster, and what makes them unusual is that mixed in with this plaster were actual ashes of the dead. And this reminds us of that embroidery where the women put part of their hair in. And this the tradition in Japan is if you can put something of yourself into what you're making to honor the Buddha or the Bodhisattva, that gives you more merit. And if unfortunately you died, so you can't help make the image, your family can take your ashes, put them in the statue, and it's as if you then, the deceased person, helped make that statue, and merit gets transferred to the deceased. Again, in Hawaii, some very old traditions that we see in some of these practices.
This is at Paia on Maui at Montokuji, and it's significant that ashes are incorporated into the figure of Jizo, and it would have been fairly easy or convenient to do that because Montokuji had its own crematory. So this is the temple here. It's right on the ocean front, and what we see here is the remains of the old crematorium. Here is a shot of the inside. You can see the curved roof, long enough for a body to be put in and firewood put over it and then burned. So this comes from a time when temples were sort of, you might say, full service temples, not only a place where you have the funeral, but also a place where you could have the body cremated. Nowadays, we do it at funeral homes, but in the old days, temples had some temples had their own crematoriums. There was one at Kona Dai Fukuji as well. So this reminds us that the temples were not just places for spiritual or religious practice, but also to handle all aspects in everybody's life, from birth to death. They were social centers. They had large social halls. Temples were really dedicated to communities, and so temples were not just some far off, isolated place, but were integrated into the community, serving the community in many different ways. Many of you will remember going to Japanese school at temples. Oh my goodness, not one of my fondest memories, but most temples had a Japanese school, and most of them are pretty much gone now. This is the language school at Aiea, Taiheiji, and it reminds us again that temples were places of education and of socializing, as well as places for religious service. Now, there's a very special plan for what's going to happen to this building, and this actually ends our presentation of our virtual tour to all of the different temples in Hawaii. And so now we can sort of look towards, or I'm going to ask Reverend Komagata to explain what the plans are for this building and how it is that they plan on moving into the future, building on a very long and illustrious past. So, Reverend Komagata, we'll turn it over to you. I will stop my share.
I can't hear him.
Oh, we can't hear you. Oh, I know why. Okay, Reverend Komagata.
Can't hear you.
Okay, now we can hear you.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I can't hear you.
100 years ago, Reverend Mokuryu Tsuda arrived in the sugar plantation town of Aiea to begin his work to establish a temple here. In the harsh working condition for plantation workers, the Japanese Issei's needed a place to rest their mind and body. Taiheiji quickly became the central gathering place for all. However, the road taken was not always a smooth ride. The temple came across many challenges, but as they faced new challenges, the entire membership worked together in harmony under one goal in mind: to create a home for the future generation. Today, we are living their legacy. With a vibrant, diverse, and thriving membership, we are all grateful to the pioneer ministers and their wives, our members, the Fujin Kai, and the entire community for all the support they have given over the past century. Embarking on the next 100 years, what does the future hold for us? Is this our time to create a new legacy for our children? Aiea Taiheiji's vision team, with the full support of the temple board and the guidance of Reverend Shuji Komagata, created a plan for our future. Let us introduce you to the vision of our future, the Soto mission of Aiea Activity Center, a multi-purpose 5,000 square feet, two-story building that will create an inviting new space for everyone to enjoy. Operating on the first floor of this multi-purpose building, the Taiheiji Adult Care Center will be a modern yet warm environment for our kupuna to stay during the day. Moving up to the second floor, with retractable walls, we can accommodate both large and small groups. As we enter the temple, the first thing that will strike your eyes are the beautiful gated entrance between the temple and the activity center, leading into the courtyard. Blend together the original design of the original Taiheiji gates with the arched spire that once stood majestically atop Taiheiji. The courtyard is a cozy and relaxing place to sit under the open roof and the Bodhi tree. To make this dream a reality, we need all your support. The Vision team has come up with a realistic plan that ensures everyone this majestic future. The success of this project depends greatly on the generous support of temple members and partnership with the Hawai'i Kansha Foundation. Isn't it time for us to create a new home for the future generation? A legacy that we can be just as proud as our pioneer ancestors.
Shuji, we still can't hear you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
No?
yes, I hear you now.
Hear me? Okay. Well, thank you very much. So I think you can hear me now.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So before the pandemic, there was always something going on at the temple 7 days a week at the Soto Mission of Aiea. And as you saw in the video, the Soto Mission of Aiea Activity Center will provide a new home for these existing activities as well as new activities in the future. And you can see the screens, right? The PowerPoint, hope it's coming up. To build the Soto Mission of Aiea Activity Center, we need to raise $1 million. In the past, we, like all churches and temples, have relied on the generous donations of our members and supporters. However, to raise $1 million, we wanted to find an alternative method that is both meaningful and mutually beneficial for the temple and people contributing money. Through Taiheiji's partnership with the Hawai'i Kansha Foundation, a private family charitable organization that has deep ties to Taiheiji dating back to the 1960s, the Legacy Endowment Bond was created. Rather than donating money for the project, friends and supporters of Taiheiji now have the opportunity to invest in the temple. This is a 20-year bond that we're offering that pays 3% fixed annual interest. It functions much like a US Treasury bond, which happens to only currently pay about 1.46% for a US Treasury bond. In this example, an investor invests $10,000 in the legacy endowment bond. He will receive a $300 annual return for 20 years. This amounts to $6,000 in returns over a 20-year period. At the end of the 20-year bond period, the principal investment amount is returned in full to all the bond owners. So in my example, the investor will get all of his original $10,000 investment back at the end of 20 years. And I've been asked this question many times now. What happens if I'm not here in 20 years? Investors are asked to designate a beneficiary of their choice when purchasing the bond. This can become a lasting gift to their children, grandchildren, or loved one. I shared this project with you today not only to show you how temples like Taiheiji can plan for their long-term future, but to also invite you to participate in our legacy endowment bond. 2020 was a terrible year for people across the world, and Taiheiji was no different. The long shutdowns and restrictions have severely impacted our economy, and we find ourselves, unfortunately, far short of our intended goal of raising $1 million. We are in great need of larger investments, but any help will do. And I humbly ask you to invest in our project. I'd like to thank you for your attention today. I'm very excited about this project and I'm optimistic about this project. This bond will help shift our thinking from survivability to sustainability. And that is something that I think goes across the board, whether you're a temple or a church, any religious organization. In addition to underwriting the bond, the Hawaii Kansha Foundation will also help establish Taiheiji's endowment, perhaps the biggest key to ensuring a sustainable future for our temple. But we desperately need help and support from investors, and it begins with those who can offer their investments to this project. So I hope you will consider investing in our project. I'll be emailing everyone some information about how you can participate in the Soto Mission of Aiea's Legacy Endowment Bond. If you need more information, please contact me at any time. I'd like to thank you once again for your kind attention. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. All right. I hope you could hear me okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, we could.
Yes.
Yeah. But yes, I don't know. I was talking to Professor Tanabe about this earlier, and I don't know if I answered all their questions. Do you have any questions or anything?
You answered them. I was particularly interested in what happens after if you're not here in 20 years. I was very happy to hear.
No, I mean you're not the only person who asked that question, but I know you were one of the people who asked that question. But I think I'd like to thank Professor Tanabe and Professor Tanabe for joining us today. We are very short on time. There were some questions that I wanted to ask, but there's one specific question I wanted to ask our presenters, and this is with regards to the role of women in Soto Zen Buddhism, and your thoughts on that.
Okay.
You
well,
go ahead.
let me start. I think anybody involved with a temple or even a church group really know that the power behind the life or the institution's health are the women. The women's auxiliary, the Fujinkai, very, very powerful, very important. But it's a kind of a supporting role. And if you look at the ministers, it's overwhelmingly male, very few women. If you look at the history of Buddhism, it is also overwhelmingly male. There are some female deities, but most of the deities are male, which is why the figure of Kannon being both male and female is so important because it sort of breaks open this lock that males have on the ritual life of temples. But when we talk about the institutional life of temples, I think there is great room for the development of female leadership and female participation. But this is going to, and this is an institutional decision. You know, it's not a kind of a religious decision. It's an institutional one in which you open up opportunities for more females. So that's a question that's in the hands of those who have the power in institutions. And it's something that those who have the power can open up and make available more opportunities for women.
Yeah. And I would point out that, there's um, kind of two kinds of Buddhism. In Hawaii, there's temple Buddhism, and that's where Buddhism grew and developed. And it grew and developed in the ways that Japanese society has grew and developed. And Japanese society to this very day is still very patriarchal. It's very difficult for women to advance in anything. But Zen on the mainland of the United States is very popular, particularly on the West Coast. And if you look at Zen centers on the West Coast, there are a lot of women taking leadership roles. And I think it may be something that we can fix generationally, that their younger people don't see the kind of hard distinction that maybe the generation before us saw. And so they're more willing to develop new ways of teaching about Buddhism. I don't think we can make up bodhisattvas and Buddhas, but that to me is not as important as changing institutional forms.
But to put it in a nutshell, Japanese Buddhism, not just Soto Zen, but all denominations, very heavily male dominated. And that's a kind of a function of Japanese culture. But we are now seeing the development of American Buddhism. Not so much here in Hawaii, but on the mainland. There are all kinds of groups, hundreds of groups that we call now American Buddhism that don't have the institutional ties that temples in Hawaii have with Japan. And as American Buddhist groups, we see a lot of women taking leadership positions. So in part, it's a kind of a cultural issue, but again, every institution has the power to make changes as they see fit.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your answer, and
Thank
All right.
you.
thank you
for
very much.
inviting.
And I'd like to thank Professor Tanabe and Professor Tanabe. But I'd like to thank all of you, the viewers, for joining us today. We had a great idea to put this together to present the tour. But what really made it successful is all of you tuning in today. So I'd like to thank all of you. Once again, this presentation will be posted online after it's been compiled, and I will email everybody so you can share that with your friends and family and temple members and community. But I think we've hit 2:30 right now, so it's perfectly 1.5 hours. And with that, I think we're gonna end this Zoom call. But I'd like to thank everybody for joining today. All right, take care
Okay.
now.
Thank you. Bye bye.